That's it. And when I say hold yourself, I want all of you get ready to stop. When I say stop, don't move. And when I say get it, I want all of y'all to go through it. Hold it now. Boogie woogie. Stop. Boogie woogie.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Discover RPG, that crazy D&D and RPG discovery show where we discover RPGs. I have a special guest host today, Ben Scott of Puffin fame. If you've ever been on YouTube and seen crazy, weird animated videos of D&D adventures gone wrong, usually, or at least crazy and fun, Ben probably did them. Anyway, go to you can check out Puffin Forest on his YouTube page, but don't do that right now. You're watching this show. Anyway, so Ben has graciously, at the very last minute, agreed to be my co-host today because Angela is out sick. Yeah, so that's
Thanks for having me.
So thank you for being here, Ben. We really appreciate it. You came in very clutch and helped us out. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah, anytime. You're always welcome. Ben, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into gaming? We normally start with our playful banter section of the show, so but we don't know each other incredibly well. So tell me about how you got into gaming.
Yeah, so originally the way that I had gotten into Dungeons and Dragons was that there was a guy online who made RPG stories and D&D stories, and he went by the name, or it was Counter Monkey by Spoonie. And are you familiar with that series?
I'm not.
Okay, good.
I may have seen some and just not been, associated with them.
But anyway, he would tell RPG stories, and I was like, "Oh, this sounds really interesting." And I didn't even play RPGs at the time, and I saw his videos on them, and I'm like, "This sounds really cool." And so that's how I first got acclimated to what it was and what role playing was. And then after I saw those videos, one of my friends posted, reading these at work, a lot of fun, lol, or something, and it had the player's handbook and stuff like that. And this was 4th edition, so we posted the books, and I said, "Wow, I know what that is. That's a role-playing game. That sounds really cool." And he's like, "Hey, I'm getting a group together. Do you want to come play with us?" And I said, "Sure." And so that was how I got into my first group. And my friend, the guy who was the GM, he's this amazing guy, very saintly guy. He had been watching Acquisitions Incorporated, and he took it upon himself to learn the system, read the rules and stuff like that. And he's a first-time GM, so he's never played before. And I mean, it's a completely different thing to come into it and you're a player. And it's like, oh, I don't know what it does. But it's like, it's so much harder to come into it as a GM. And you have to write a story and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I love this idea that I'm hearing about more and more people who came into this from media that is not the game itself. We've always had like gateway games like Magic. I started with Magic the Gathering back in 90 something. I'm not going to talk about how old I am. And I started with Magic the Gathering, and then that kind of led to these other games. But thinking about YouTube or Twitch or something like that, and now all of a sudden you still start to see people coming like, "Oh no, I was just watching entertainment about these things." I'm sure there's stories about people seeing your show and going, "Oh, this looks like fun. I want to play D&D because of what Ben has done here."
I heard that. I have had some people who say I came into Adventures League because I saw a video, and I have gone to run a game and then played with people who saw a video and came in, and they came to my table to play.
That's amazing. That is very cool.
There was one of the players who came in there who said, like, "You sound a lot like Puffin Forest," and there was a silence over the group, and I was like, "No." And I put that quote on my Twitter, and a lot of people were like, "Well, he's right."
He's not wrong. You do
He's
sound a
not
lot
wrong.
like that guy. Oh, that's funny. God, I don't know what I would do in that situation. I'd be like, weird.
And actually, what I started doing is, oh, do I? And I started doing the absurd voice. Oh no, that sounds terrible. You did not tell me that. And then he
I was just about to say, I would probably just go into the absurd voice and just do that forever.
And then I said, I'm Puffin Forest. It's
yeah, you gotta at that point you gotta own up to it. I mean, you could also just see how long you could go and like leave the guy just wondering for the rest of his life, like, did I game with the Puffin Forest guy?
Yeah, there was okay. I did have a flip moment where someone had made a character. They had sat down, new player, and they had made a character called Savage Rage, and I'm like. I was thinking to myself, like, what's the name of your... Like, and I'm like, did I influence this or something? I didn't bring anything up, but then he laughed.
Now you're always going to wonder.
And to this day, I still wonder, like, did I...
So if you're out there, own up. Come on.
Because I was thinking about, like, what the coincidence was that they would just have... Because I'm like, there's part of me that's like, no, it can't be. And then there's another side of like, is it? Maybe.
And then and then the whole time you're like, how do I bring this up without sounding like I'm tooting my own horn?
Hey, is that a character name that, you know, like, do you watch, like, just hypothetically, do you watch online videos? I had another story where that happened, where I went to the stream of Many Eyes. I think I told this one, where I was, because it's like, I go there and like, no one knows who I am. And it's like, I kind of want to talk to people and stuff like that and see if there's fans and stuff. And I'm like, oh crap, like, what do I do? Like, do I just go up to people and be like, hey, do you watch YouTube videos? Because I make those sometimes.
What you need is a full body puffin suit. Is the problem.
I need that, but
a big furry puffin suit, and then you just walk.
I did once where I was talking with some people, and then I said, like, because they said they watch YouTube videos on D&D, and I'm like, well, funny you should mention that, because I make videos on D&D. I'm Puffin Forest, and they're like, oh, who's that? I was like, you know, I make animated. I was like, Jody.
You're like, only about 500,000 viewers or something. I mean, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. Oh, I can't even imagine.
I mean, I apologize if it's coming off weird. It's just the fact that it's no. Because I'm an animator. Like, I want to, like, sometimes I want to talk with fans, like if people are interested in the work or something like that. But because I don't show up, it's like, how do I interject that into conversations? You know, just like probing the waters.
So, speaking of Absurd, which is absolutely my favorite character,
Absurd,
he kind of comes back as kind of a bit player. At least the voice a little bit comes back as a player in different aspects, characters in different aspects. But you've done something that everyone has dreamed of doing, and nobody has actually ever done. I know they can watch the video, and you need to go watch the video, but. How was it playing a character that had one of every class level? How do you even build that character?
Okay, so let me tell you right now. First, going into it was okay. So we got the pitch. It's going to be a 14th level character.
Yeah,
and it's like this thing where there's so many different ideas that you're running through of like, oh, a barbarian, this build, that build, and stuff like that. And of course,
and especially as somebody who DMs, you don't get to play a lot, so you're like, I have like 12 characters ready to go.
Yeah, and so the thing is that I had this idea to make this guy who had one of every class, just because, like, oh, that's going to be an interesting story. And what was funny was because I made the character because I have a YouTube channel, and because I was like, let's say that I make this character. Let's say I make this character and it turns out to be just terrible. Like, it's going to make for a great video. And let's say I make it, it's like awesome. That's still going to be a great video. You know, it's like It's such a
like, I think it came out a little column A, a little column B.
Yeah, it's interesting because I ever since having the YouTube channel, it's kind of changed how I view making characters and view running the game, because I'll be like, okay, I just want to, like, beforehand I'm like, oh, I just want to play the game, whatever, you know, play a character.
Yeah, of course.
But then I know, like, I want to take this huge risk, because it's like, if it's terrible, like, that's a story that's interesting, and then if it's like unbelievably great, then that's something else too. But anyway, talking about the design for the character is, once again, it's like he had to have this really weird convoluted backstory for, like, how does he keep getting kicked out of places and stuff like that. And what was funny was I didn't have a voice for him. I just knew he had, or actually I had the name. I knew he was going to be called Absurd. and I didn't even have a we were going on our way to the game, and I said, hello, like I did this weird voice, and then for God knows what reason it just stuck, and I just kept doing it over and over, and then that became his like shtick. It actually, what was funny was that the GM was in with me on the actually, okay, so first I pitched the idea to the GM, and at first he was like, look, dude, like, are you just doing this to break the game? Like, do you want, like, are you trying to have fun? Or like, because he thought I was not going to have fun with that character. And I told him, no, like, I think this is going to be really interesting. And then he's like, okay, that sounds all right. I'll work with you, you know, or something like that. And he actually, he kept it a secret from the other players because they were discussing. And the players at the game were like, oh, Ben probably made a human fighter because he always makes human fighters. Ha ha ha. Yeah. And then I'm just laughing, and then I say nothing, and they're like, and I'm like, well, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
He is human, and
I am a human fighter.
Fighter. But then and he intentionally made sure that I went last. And then I was describing the backstory. I was going through the full thing. And as I was going through the full thing, he starts holding up his hands and he goes, and he starts counting off each of the classes.
That's amazing. I love it. I think that is an amazing story. It's one of my favorites.
There was another aspect to that, which I left out, which is that playing Absurd was a mixture of both great and bad. Like, it's... Okay, so one of the things is that he has all these things, but he's terrible at everything. And so he's one of those guys where when you role play him, you have to role play him failing. Like, oh, don't worry, I will tell the guards to help us out, and they will be like, oh, we'll help you now. And so I'll role play. I have to role play the failure first, and then if he succeeds, it's like, oh, I didn't expect that. Oh, okay, you know, because we're so used to role playing it as a success and then being surprised when it fails. Yes. That because he was terrible at everything, you had to go the opposite way. You had to always assume that he would fail. And sometimes some of the other players would want to have like a serious moment, or they'd plan. And unfortunately, I would have to take Absurd out of the scene and have him kind of go into the corner, because if they're having a serious moment, I didn't want to interject. Hello, I am Absurd. You are talking to your dead daughter now. You know, exactly. Like there's sometimes when you interject where it's like, oh, that's kind of funny. But sometimes when you interject, you actually will hurt other people's scenes. And so you kind of have to read the mood. And he was such a, like, I don't know how to say it. Like, he would hurt the mood for other players. And so because of that, I would kind of have to watch and see, like, okay, they're having a scene over there. I'm going to have to step back. And he actually, what was funny was that probably in a long campaign, like, he may not be fun to play, just in terms of he's kind of a one-note guy. He kind of has this one thing going for him. He is disruptive to some extent for some of the more serious scenes. And his character is very, you know, he's not really horrendously capable. So he's kind of a comedic sidekick kind of character. So I think for a lot of people, like, it probably wouldn't be a very fun character to play
for a long-term campaign, but for one shot, I think it's a great idea. And I'm always enraptured with the idea. But it's funny, you just touched on like 5 points that we've talked about in the past few weeks. So, you know, the failures could be successes, you know, and all of these, you know, these different points. The Absurd is our entire show just kind of rolled into one character, and it's kind of hilarious. I love it.
It's one other thing is that it did actually show me, and this is something I've learned, which is like sometimes it is, once again, more funny to role play the failures, where it's like, you know, I'm gonna go up to the guards and tell them like, hey, like there's a house on fire, like we didn't do it or something, and you fail, and it's like, oh, did you guys want that house? It was an ugly place. Like, no one liked it. It was very ugly. And don't worry, we will build a new one. It will be bigger and be better, and everyone will be like, wow, this is really big.
I love it. No, I agree with you completely. I think role-playing the failure out up front is something we didn't touch on. Just that in general, if you fail, it can be a success. But I like that idea of, and I've done it with a character occasionally without really thinking of why I'm doing it. You actually bring it to the forefront there about how it can really enhance the role play. This idea that you're really terrible at talking to people, but you just happen to roll that really good roll one time, and this crazy thing you just said to this person worked. And I really like that idea.
I think it's funny because it's also just like most of the time when people role play failures, they role play it as kind of like slapstick humor and stuff like that. And I mean, it not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that that's the way that people mostly traditionally do it, is like, oh, I fail. It's like I punch the guy in the face and then fall on top of her, and then we go tumbling down the stairs or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty. Well, I think that's good for our playful banter section. Do you want to get into some of this? Let's see here.
Yeah, sure.
That's first. See, I've already lost our order here. All right, playing in the street is little kind of segues from what we were talking about. So you have an experience that I don't have, and I've been doing this for a long time, and we'll just say a long time. Something I've never done is I have never story told in public, in a public setting, like at a convention or at a game store. And I've also never done Adventures League because I am not good with rigidity. So I wanted to talk about your experiences a little bit with the Adventures League, and how transitioning from what you'd said your style was kind of more open or branching narrative, which we'll talk about later, but more to this kind of rigid, you have to run modules and they have to be very specific because it's a balanced system.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah, so the thing is that with me, with that, in the past, I never ran modules. I never did anything public. And then I started going to Adventures League. I started playing in there, and I started really liking it. And it's like, they're so different from each other, playing in a homebrew and playing in Adventures League. And that's something I always talk about is just the fact that it's like, in Adventures League, it's great to meet people. It's great to have a public space. It's great that you get to have this thing where you can make your characters off to the side and then bring them to Adventures League, and you have this shared world and stuff like that, shared experiences, and you're working with like 60 other people, and that's great. Whereas with a homebrew, there's a lot of accounting and like scheduling and trying to get, oh, I can do it on Wednesday, you can do it on Tuesday. Whereas with this, it's just like, be here on Thursday. Anyone who's here on Thursday, you get to play and stuff like that. That's kind of nice. And actually, that's a big part of it is just because of the scheduling, because I don't like having to deal with all of that.
Scheduling is a pain, yes.
Yeah.
I schedule 16 people for 5 games a week. Yes, I understand.
Yeah. But anyway, as far as running, I kind of got into it like fairly quickly because we had this problem where we're low on GMs. Like a lot of the Adventures Leagues, you're running like 15 players for one GM. And so because of that, not the same table, what happens is that you're like, you start getting full and you start having to either kick people out, like, because the problem is that, and there's different philosophies. Like some coordinators are like, pack them in. Like if you want a 15 player table, that's fine. And then some coordinators are like, look, it's not going to be fun at a certain point. Like we go up to 7 and then we are not doing it above that number. And anyway, the thing is that because they're so low on GMs, the second I said like, oh, I'm interested in it, they're like, well, funny thing for you, you have to like, we need you like right now, because if you can't run, like we're gonna have to kick people out.
Like you say that and they just pull the chair out, come sit down.
Yeah. And so that was funny. But anyway, so I started running for them, and one of the things is that I started having to run modules, and before I would run homebrew and stuff like that, and then also like, you worry about the judgment of like, oh, the GM, like, because you can't really use homebrew rules, and it makes you realize like how much of our stuff is personal or homebrew. And it made me, by running by a set schedule, it's like everyone's kind of on the same page. Like people come into so the idea is that if you have a bunch of homebrew, like everyone has their own house rules for how they run things, and you go between different tables and people have different systems. But the thing is that because it's like, look, we are not doing any house rules, we're just running things by the book. It's actually, to some extent, it's actually a little bit nice because people come to the table and they know what to expect going into it. And actually, when I run with a lot of new players, I will run stuff just straight from the book because I worry that they're going to get mixed up with what my house rules are and what the actual rules say. And so because of that, whenever I start with new players, I'll just show them, these are the rules, this is how it works, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then when I've been running with veteran groups for like a year or something like that, I'll say like, hey, what if we tried this new system for something or something? There was a flip side of that where I was running for. I'm getting a little bit off topic on house rules, but it's like I always try and avoid it with
we go on tangents a lot on this show.
Oh, yes. Yeah. But anyway, as far as getting back to Adventures League, the thing is that I would receive a module, and I actually found after a while that I really started to enjoy running modules. And in my home game, I run homebrew, but with modules, one of the interesting things is that and once again, for like the first 5 years or something that I was running, I would not run modules, and I would hate them because it's like, look, I can't keep all this stuff in my head. Like, you look at a module and it's like they got 20 freaking characters and they have like all these backstories and stuff. Like, look, I can't remember 20 characters. I can't like, and I would come at it like an open book test where it's like, I'm going to read through the module, I'm going to memorize it, and then I'm going to run it. And the reality is that you shouldn't do that, or you should try and avoid it if you can. The reality is that you just have to handle it scene by scene, where it's like, okay, in this scene, this character and this character, and you take like 10 seconds, read through it, see if there's any triggers. What I call triggers are like, if the players something, like read those. What triggers are like, if the players sneeze when they're in this room, then the entire place detonates. Like, you need to read that, but kind of go everything one at a time. And it's actually, if you run modules regularly, it can actually save you quite a bit of time, because you can kind of flip through them ahead of time, figure out what the villain's up to, like figure out like, do I need to lay anything down like early on? And then well-written modules, you can just open up and just start from the beginning and go to the end. Like, well-written ones are very clear. If you need to do something at the beginning, they will tell you that. The badly written ones, they'll say like, oh, by the way, 3 scenes ago, you were supposed to have done this. Like, that's like, are you kidding me? Like,
yeah, exactly.
And
like,
it's,
oh, you didn't read the whole thing? Oh, shame on you.
And,
yeah.
And I will actually tell the players when I'm running stuff like that, where I'm like, look, it says right here, this character just gets away or something like that. I'll tell them that, just so that way they know ahead of time. Just so that way they don't think like I'm trying to pull something on them. I'm just telling them like, look, we're running a module. This is the way it works and stuff like that. I'm trying to think. A lot of the module focuses on the characters, their interaction with NPC, how they go about solving problems. And the problem is, you really, in an Adventures League situation, you can't play an open world, because in an open world, the way that it works oftentimes is that you lay these little seeds, and then the players can go off on those new trails, kind of branching out.
Yeah,
and the problem is that if you lay down a seed, that player's not going to be coming back next week, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's like, ooh, I laid down this scene, and maybe 3 weeks from now, we're going to be able to go back and figure it out. And like, no, that's not going to be happening. And so it has to be like a smaller sandbox. Like, you can still play around with it, but it's like, it has to be more confined.
You have little baby barriers around you, like holding you into that.
Yeah, because the problem is that if the players go off of that, and like, some players are okay with just kind of faffing about and kind of like, oh, we're just kind of hanging out for like 2 hours or something, but other players aren't going to be interested in that. And you really need to. This is part of Adventures League, is that with D&D, there's 3 pillars. There's social encounters, there's combat, and there's exploration. And you read the players and figure out which ones, what plot lines and what things the players are engaging with, and you focus on there. And if there's a section, if you're running through a module and there's a section that the players are just not having fun with, you just kind of like skip, or like just kind of breeze through it really quickly and then get to the thing that they are interested in.
Right. Very cool. You mentioned sneezing in a room earlier. It reminded me of a game that I had a while back where the players were taking care of a fey child, a baby, that had been born to one of the characters and their significant other. And every time this baby sneezed, we would have a wild magic search, because it was my excuse for bringing in more wild magic, because I love wild magic.
Oh my freaking God, I love wild magic. I never get enough wild magic.
Never enough. So I made it that anytime a player sneezed on camera, the baby sneezed wherever it was in the world. And if the baby happened to be within proximity of them, it would have a wild magic search. So I thought that was a fun way to go. I love bringing in that meta concept into games and kind of making it affect the world. It's fun. But yeah, I love. But for as far as Adventures League, I've often wanted to. I just don't have the time to get to a store and be able to play and do Adventures League or storytell it. But it's something I'm definitely interested in. How would you suggest, though, that people get involved? Do you have any particular tips on how to start getting involved in Adventures League?
Honestly, I think it's just like show up, like, oh, we're having Adventures like at 6 o'clock. Like the way that a lot of them are structured, you just show up or leave. If you are someone
who don't need to do anything pre and have things prepared or anything.
So if you are someone who plays Dungeons and Dragons, you probably want to sit down, make a character up, or print out a pre-gen or something and go there with them. But if you are someone who has never played Dungeons and Dragons, you can go there, and a lot of times they will have pre-generated characters there for you that they'll just, here you go.
And hopefully if it's a good game store, you can call and find out in advance.
Yeah, and stuff like that. It's and they will have dice, and even if like, okay, so first off, in a room full of people who all play D&D, there's more than, like, people have extra
more than
sets.
Enough dice. Yeah.
There's enough dice. But like, even if you are someone who's like, oh, I don't know what I need, and let's say it's like you're going into a group, they will be able to say like, oh, these are the dice that you buy, and they can point. I will also say that, and this is the place I always point people to, is that they have if you've never played D&D before, Wizards of the Coast has basic rules online for free, which are, they actually they changed them. They combined the DMG basic rules and the player's handbook basic rules into one group. Yeah. And it's like, it's a streamlined thing where it just tells you the combat rules, and it just gives you like 3 or 4 sample classes. It just says like wizard, cleric, fighter, and then like ranger or something like that. I forget, but they don't have the extra classes. And you can, even if you want to get into like homebrew stuff, like not even Adventures League, like you could just open that up and just run from those rules without making any of the purchases of the like handbooks.
Very cool. Yeah, I know they've had the SRD or the basic rules available. I know that they recently did an update to them to kind of simplify them. I think there's like different levels now. But the basic game, if you've never played D&D, also evidently has a great module. Have you ever run Minds of Falinar?
I have not. I've heard some people who really like it. I imagine probably if you're a veteran coming to it, it would probably be some. I've never run it, so I don't have any opinion.
All that I know about it is the first 3 or 4 episodes of the Adventure Zone. Evidently, is that story. But then about halfway through, he abandons the story and goes off. Griffin McElroy goes off on his own thing. So I know very little about it, but I've given it as a gift several times. I've heard a lot of good things about that, especially as a beginning story. It gives a lot of those 3 pillars you were talking about. It kind of gives you all of them in one, which is something that not all modules do.
Yeah, there was one I was running, which was what was it? It was Sunless Citadel from Tales of the Yawning Portal. And I really like that one as kind of a starting module, because you start off with this mystery. You know, there are these missing kids, and there's this apple that the goblins sell that whenever you take a bite, it instantly cures any disease that you have. And they're like, where are the goblins getting this apple from? And so it's this mystery going in there. Either you're someone who's sick, who's like figuring out how to get more of that curative medicine, or you're someone who's going to Sunless Citadel because you're looking for these missing people. And so it starts off with that mystery, and then you also have the fighting. And you, as a GM, you can kind of like, oh, which one is people? Do they like the talking? Do they like the combat? And kind of rotate between them.
Right. Very cool. Awesome. So if anybody has any questions out there, also I want to put out there that towards the end, we'll probably take some questions for Ben or I. Mostly for Ben, I'm sure. And we'll go ahead and answer some of those. So if you have any questions, or along the way, if you have any questions about what we're talking about, let us know. Also, I want to say thank you to Roll Anvil, who came in and rated us with 20 some odd people. Roll Anvil is our network sponsor, and we just really appreciate that. So thank you guys. Okay, so let's go ahead and pop into our serious topic for the week. This is Enter the Matrix is talking about players who have real-world knowledge and how we as DMs can use that to our advantage instead of a detriment. The story comes from, apologize, I don't have the user. If you happen to be watching, please let me know and I will credit. But on one of the Facebook pages I'm on, DM was struggling because his players went to a blacksmith to get something better than the average axe. They wanted something nicer than the average hand axe. and they went there and he described this beautiful, ornate, all metal axe. And one of his players looked at another one of his players and says that axe would be terrible. And the other one's like, I know, but just let it happen. And evidently those two players in real life as a hobby make weapons. And so they realized that the way it was described would be a very poor weapon. Now, before it gets to that point, it becomes almost confrontational. How do we as DMs go about harnessing that information, or what could we do in those situations to kind of preempt that from happening? I'm going to guess, at least so far, you might agree on a lot of things, that we have very similar thoughts on this, but go ahead. I'm going to let you start.
Okay. So for me, first off, I mean, it really depends on the personality of the people you're talking to. Like, because sometimes people are like, oh, here's a suggestion, ha, 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 and they laugh. And then I laugh, and we're just like, and part of Dungeons & Dragons in the RPG, you just roll some dice, and this is what happens. And I actually have some from stories from different things, and me being on the reverse end of that. But the thing is that I honestly, it comes down a lot to different personalities. Like, and sometimes they will give me some details, and I'll be like, ooh, yeah, you can add that. Like, that's cool. And then sometimes they're like, actually, it wouldn't take 3 hours to do this. And I'm like, look, it's a short rest. We only have 1 hour. We're just gonna, or like, look, I'm just gonna roll some dice, and this is what happens.
Right. Evidently, the situation, my understanding is that the stats weren't going to change at all on the axe. That's kind of one of the things that kind of threw me. It's like, it doesn't matter if the stats aren't going to change. If you're not looking to buy in, what do we call it in 3.5, a masterwork weapon, something that is, handcrafted and gorgeous. Who cares how it's described if it's going to do the same thing? If it sounds cool, it's kind of the rule of cool. You just let it fly. But the other side of it is, I think if I knew that, maybe this gentleman didn't know, but if I knew that up front, I might ask them to describe what they come up with. What this use their knowledge as part of the story. I often ask my players to help me create the world as we go on, like to come to a new tavern or something. I'll ask them, well, what's unique about this tavern? And then we create this whole amazing place ourselves. So that's how I would kind of solve that problem. Is I would go to the player.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, well, you have the knowledge here. You tell me.
Yeah, because it's like, I think that people would be like, oh, like ignorant, like I don't know what's going on in the world. And actually that was a big fear that I had, was just like the idea as a GM, like, oh crap, like there's stuff I don't know going on in this world. Like, they talk to the guard, like, I don't know his name, or something like that. And that's a fear that you get over with like really quick, because
people asking names
or something. That's a fear that I get over like really quick, because it's like the players know that I don't know all the details of the world. They know that
good players.
Good players. And this is where I'm getting in, is that there are some who are like really confrontational, who will, like, if you're playing with someone who's like, actually water would do this in this kind of environment or something, like, there's a freaking dragon flying over there. Over there's a freaking chipmunk with like an aviator goggles who's flying like a little balloon around and fighting with people. Like, I don't want to hear your shit.
I love it. Perfect. I think that's a really good answer overall for
I have a few stories now to get into.
Go for it, please. Love stories.
So the few stories. One is that I had a scenario where they were doing a sailing adventure, and none of the players were two of the players were in the Navy. And so they're like, oh, like, what's like, oh, you guys go into your boat. It's like, is it a boat or is it a ship? I'm like, well, there's a difference. I was like,
okay, so that's hold on one second. So I have an interesting story there. I was speaking to a lawyer in the law office I work at, and he was talking about his boat. And I said, oh, you're going to go out on your ship this weekend. He goes, it's a boat. I said, what's the difference? He goes, ships are what they put boats on to carry them around. I said, oh, okay. It's like, no, if your boat can fit on a ship, that's the difference. It's small enough to go on to another one.
They were making jokes about, because I was saying like, oh, you guys, like, is the port or starboard side or something like that? I'm like, it's this side or something like that, left to right. And
4 letters in port, four letters in left. That's how.
And I think I was describing as like, oh, the anchor goes down, it latches onto something or something, and they were making comments because apparently when they want to stop in the water and they drop the anchor, they it's the chain which stops it. It's the friction of the chain that prevents the boat from moving around. And so the anchor just keeps it like below. It's just a weight there.
Got it.
And then
straight down.
Yeah, and then they were also and then I took it a step further. I was making jokes about, oh, you guys need to turn on your boat brakes so that way you guys can stop in the water and stuff like that. Then there was another story which I had, which was the reverse, where we were playing in Call of Cthulhu, and I've worked on cars before, and one of the cars was like driving along the road and it got stuck in a rut. And the players had not worked on cars, and so they were describing how they pull out a jack and they start jacking up the car. And then once it's on the jack, it's very mobile. You can move it around on the jack, and that allows it to kind of move around. I'm like, your jack's broken if it's doing that. I was giving them shit about it because the idea with the jack is that it stabilizes it and prevents it from moving. And so the idea that it's like sliding around on the jack, I was like, no, it's
that would scare me. I would not want to be underneath that.
Yeah, and so I was making comments of like, oh, okay, like how would we do it? And I was like, well, like you can put you jack it up and then you put some stuff there. And so I was describing how it's like, look, if you want to move the car, it's easier off of the jack to move the car around.
Yeah, that seems weird. So Secondhand Samurai had a kind of a follow up here. It's a good question. So a lot of times when we're dealing with players, especially players we don't know, and we're dealing with puzzles, like if they get a puzzle or some sort of riddle they're trying to solve, you run into this kind of discrepancy where the player information and knowledge versus the stats on the character sheet can be very, very different. Yeah, see, you're very
okay. So I actually had a puzzle which I came up with where it involved these keys, and they had to assemble the keys together. I can't do it on camera. It's like a little bit hard, but the keys, you would use the keys and assemble them into a cube. And that was a complete puzzle for the players, not the characters. But if the way I was going to do it is like if they failed the puzzle over and over, I would have them make like a knowledge roll and I'd give them a hint or something like that.
Right. So at a certain point you have them start making knowledge rolls and kind of doing that. And I think that's fairly typical across the board, but always for me, I always try to start and let them have that opportunity, because I have players in my games that love puzzles like that. And they love riddles and they love trying to figure everything out. And they want to spend a long time trying to figure it out. And in home games, as long as the entire table is okay with it, go for it. But I also have created puzzles where I try to make it timed. I did one final boss combat where the players had to run around with a boss who was completely immune to damage. They captured the essence of the Raven Queen, could not die. They needed to perform a ritual, and he was running around casting fireballs and just destroying the crap out of them while they had to run around and solve riddles. And I had physical things. One of the things was textile based. I had a bag with a bunch of washers in it and 2 quarters, and they had 6 seconds to reach in and pull one thing out, and they had to try to grab the quarters instead of the washers. And every round on their turn, they could do one thing. One other one was I had a bunch of vials that all had black liquid in them, and they had to find the essence of the Raven Queen, which smelled like winter, and they all had different smells in them using extracts, and the winter one was peppermint. So these are puzzles that are fairly simple, but because they were timed, you can only do one bottle around. So you had to go, well, there's peppermint. They actually got peppermint like right off, but is that what winter smells like? Maybe I'm looking for winter green. Maybe I'm looking for pine. I got to go through them and figure out what, a few more of them. And even though they had the right one right off the bat, it was the last puzzle because they had to go through every single bottle. So that's another way of doing puzzles where it's not necessarily complex. It's just time consuming and there's like a thought to it.
Mm-hmm. There's a few things. One is that puzzles are like, I really enjoy them and I will give them to players. But when I give them to players, like I'm kind of testing, like, how do people feel about this? And if I gave them to the players and the players are like, another puzzle, then I would be like, coming back into my bag, like I would retreat. So, but when I show them a puzzle and they're like, ooh, we have to solve this, or something like that, then that tells me, okay, they want more of this going into the future. And personally, I really like them. And so I enjoy giving them to the players. And I also like it being timed because in this one, I presented them with a puzzle and then we were playing combat. And so what happened is that it was whenever the players completed the puzzle, it would end the combat, because they'd be like, oh, I found this puzzle, and then this happened. And so it was kind of real time, and that was one of the reasons why I did that, is because they could, when it wasn't their turn, they could be working on this puzzle and be trying to figure it out. So that way it gave some of the players
that's a great idea. I didn't think about that. That's because mine, they had to wait for their turn to do it. But I like that idea. They could work on it when it's not their turn. That gives them, that's a really good idea. I like that a lot.
Actually, so that was the original intent, and then someone in like the first or second round of combat puts 5 necklace of fireballs on this thing and detonates them, and so that ended the combat. And right as that happened, he solved the puzzle.
Pretty quick. That's amazing. So one of my favorite puzzles I've used is the anti-puzzle. The players went into an empty room, door seals behind them, and there's an hourglass in the middle of the table that starts turning. And they can walk over and they can flip the hourglass. And the entire room, that seems to be the only thing they can do. They dreaded this hourglass running out. But the only way to unlock the final door is to just let the hourglass run out. So we spent nearly half an hour in game of them just turning this hourglass, going, what do we do? And finally, they're like, we let it run out. And sure enough, the door opened. It was very interesting.
There was actually a flip. There was another module I was running that was very similar to that, where there was this like entrance hallway. And the thing is that when they go into the entrance hallway, there's a timer that starts going down. 10, 9, 8, and there's a lever that appears there. And the solution is to do nothing. That's the answer. You just wait for 10 seconds and don't do anything, and the door opens. And if you try and do something like try and pull the lever, then the trap activates.
Right. That's great.
And actually what's funny is I've had a lot of players go through that, and they solve the puzzle, but they solve it by basically failing. By basically oh, I'm gonna fireball that freaking door or something like that. And so because it's not pulling the lever, it doesn't activate the trap. So it's like they technically failed the trap, but you have to fail the trap in order to get through. It's weird.
Right. Yeah, it's a fun dynamic to try to put in those reverse concepts, and you have to try to make it super obvious. Oh, it's a beautiful. You describe the handle of it just intricately. It's a cherry wood with its intricate carvings on it, and it's a very interesting thing to do.
There's a few other things. One is it's always with puzzles about giving clues, how much information to give people is always a struggle, and you can slowly give people more details to kind of give them just a few details at first, but then if they're struggling with it, then suddenly, oh, there's some carvings, there's some grooves you see, and so give them a little bit more information until they can solve it. And then there's another thing where puzzles are very, very personality based. For example, you'll get some people who, if they can't solve the puzzle in the first minute, they're like, oh, this is stupid, or something like that. And then you get opposite people where they feel cheated if they can solve it in the first minute. They're like, no, if this puzzle doesn't take me 20 minutes to solve, it's a waste of my time, or something. And when you think about it, puzzles affect people differently psychologically. There's this thing where you first are introduced to the puzzle where it's ooh, it's really awesome and you're really excited for it. And then it starts dropping off, and people drop off at different rates. And it goes past a certain point where it goes from being fun to, I just want to get this thing done. It's neutral. And then you get to the end where it's it starts being unfun, and where it's you're just going through the same problem over and over again. And so what happens is everyone has this threshold of this is the most fun, or this is peak, ooh, excitement. And then it starts dropping off. And there's a different point where it goes from being fun to hurting yourself. And when you think about it, puzzles are really weird. You are struggling, you're hurting yourself, you're they're to some extent, they're in some ways not pleasant per se. And some people really enjoy that. They enjoy the working on it. They enjoy the struggle. And then some people hate it, utterly hate it, or sometimes they both like the puzzle. It's just some people think it's too hard or too easy. And that's when you get down to difficulty, the way it affects people is so different.
And everybody's threshold is different. And that is the DM's problem in a nutshell. That not just with puzzles, but with role play, politics. Politics are a big intrigue in any game. It's a big diversive issue for a lot of people. I have about half of my players who are I never want to deal with politics in game, and I got about a half of the other half that's I could take it or leave it. And I've got a few that are like, yes, I would love to see some politics in the game. And so now you've got to kind of balance that amongst everybody.
Mhm.
And it can mean that some sessions are not as fun for other people as others.
Yeah, there's a few things also involved with that, where with a puzzle, at least like you'll have like one or two people who like really enjoy the puzzle aspect, who really want to work on it, who want to sit down and solve it. And then the other people who will role play in the background, or they'll do some other stuff. And so you can kind of separate between the two. With politics, though, that's like game engulfing. Like that's a big deal. Like that's a huge amount of thing. But on the flip side of that, with puzzles, people who don't like a certain puzzle, they really don't like a puzzle. But with people who don't like politics, like I feel like they get to a point where it's just like, I'm just not having fun. But it's not. But with a puzzle, you feel like humiliated when you don't solve it. You feel like the puzzle is like almost in a way like insulting
Mocking
you,
you.
or something, like mocking you. It thinks it's better than I am.
I love that. Perfect. I think that was a great segue away from what we were actually talking about, but I think it actually covers a lot of the same topics. And I'm 100% with you there. All right, let's go ahead and move on to sandcastles. This one's one I'm really excited to get to talk about, because we're no longer talking about the restrictive, horrible, in my mind, world of running modules, and we're going to talk about what you get asked the most about. Is open worlds and branching narratives. And branching narratives, you make a distinction between open worlds and branching narratives, or at least you did in our chat. And I would like to know what you see different between those.
Okay.
So I can kind of get a better idea of what we're talking about.
Okay, so first off, for me, with the terminology, like it's something that I struggle with, and I will kind of use the terminology around a little bit flexible, because it's like a lot of times when people say, oh, I want an open world game, like there's different interpretations of what that means and stuff like that. So it's for me, with an open world, it's like you seed a bunch of different missions and there's a bunch of different problems in the world, and then players can either choose to tackle certain problems or tackle other ones. And the way they go about it, there are resources as well. There's not just problems, there's also resources. Whereas with like branching narratives, I feel like those are more along the line of like GM has planned out a certain thing to happen, and then has said, oh, at this point, if they decide not to do this, they go this other way. So I feel like with branching narratives, those are more like concrete route. Like, for example, you have two distinct concrete routes, whereas with a sandbox, it's like, or an open world, it's just like, okay, you guys can go off, do whatever. There's just a bunch of problems, and it's up to you.
Okay, I think that's a very good distinction. I see the different paths there.
Yeah, and once again, I mean, the problem is that with like the terminology, there's a lot of different interpretations and stuff like that, and that's just how I interpret it whenever I use that terminology.
Yeah, and of course, there are a lot of different interpretations. The way that I talk about sandboxing is very different than the way some other people talk about sandboxing. You know, some people who, when I say sandboxing, I mean literally, I don't care if my players go, we're done with these politics, we're just going to go north. What's north,
Yeah.
you know? And other people talk about sandbox like, well, you've got, you know, a larger limited sandbox. We're going to stay in this city, or we're going to stay in this country, or whatever. I really could care less if my players go, you know what, we really want to go explore the other continent. If that's what my players decide to do because they're just done with the story, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I can make something happen.
Now, the question I have is that, do you like plan ahead of time and say like, oh, you know, like here's some stuff that might be, or just a general idea of what's north, like, oh, it's cold and there's a bunch of mountains and stuff like that, and they have their own problems? Or
I have very little planned in my world, although I'm building the world with my group right now, so that will eventually be fleshed out, and I will have all the different areas. Yeah. But right now, I try to leave things open because I want to kind of have that opportunity to create in the moment. A lot of times I do my best kind of on the spot, except with NPC names. That's my bane. But other than that, I do my best kind of in the moment in those situations. So when the players say, oh, we want to go explore the mountains that are nearby, I can kind of, okay, well, now I've got to figure out what this is like, and I kind of look at what's around, and I make it unique. That's usually my big factors. I just want it to be different than what they've dealt with before. I don't want to be like, oh, another snowy capped mountain, yay, you know.
Oh my God. I will tell you that there's nothing more defeated than if you're the GM and being like, you guys have to climb this tower now to defeat this evil wizard. And it's like, I guess we'll go, like, or something like that. Or they're just totally not like, okay, I guess we have to. And it's like, oh my God. But it's like if the players say, we want to go take care of this, like they make up the plan and they're invested in it, then it's a lot easier for me to lay the road work because they're saying, we want to go here. We want to talk to this person.
Right. And this goes to, I talked about this in the first episode. This is sort of how I do my process. If I have information that the players need, let's say that they have to know this little bit of information. In a module, it would be like, here's the old gypsy woman. I know that's a horrible term, sorry. Here's the old nomadic woman who is fortune teller who has this information. The players have to get to her. They have to get to her somehow. Here's a bunch of ways you could do that, but you have to get to her. I would rather say, okay, a mysterious figure needs to give them this information. I can have mysterious figures all over the place. I can have the cryptic hobo down the alley muttering to themselves. I can have, the court jester, making jokes about it, and then have that information and kind of sneak it to the player. I have a lot of different options. I just know that the information is what's important. And then I need to know why in the module, why would that information come from this source and how does it connect back? But I also have I used to do a lot of sales and actually, I hate to admit it, but I did some MLMs for a while. And they had a philosophy that I used in my DMing. They say, make a mess and then clean it up. And so that's what I do. A lot of times I'm just throwing out a lot of different things as the players go, especially in my West Marches style campaign where I have 16 players, 5 nights a week. The first 2 weeks was just me going, what do you guys want to explore? Who do you want to talk to? And I kind of create these things all around. And then in later weeks, I start connecting those points behind the scenes and going, oh, well, this connects to that, and that connects to this. And now all of a sudden, and then they do the same thing. And that's the best part, is the players will go, wait, does that mean that this was this? And I went, yes, absolutely. I had that planned all along.
Yeah, because sometimes what'll happen is that you'll start with some kind of an intrigue of like, there's a guy who wakes up on a shore and he doesn't remember where he came from. And so sometimes you'll have something worked out beforehand of like, ooh. And then sometimes it's like, I have no idea where he came from. Like, I'll just work that shit out as we go along. Like,
exactly.
He'll remember.
I wanted something new. My players go to a bar every day to kind of meet up. That's how we kind of convoluted that this group of 6 people out of 16 get together. And I'm like, okay, I don't want it to just be another bar day. So there's a young gentleman who looks like he's a dockhand. His hands are all blistered, maybe his first week or something. He's passed out in the bar with a beer and a half-eaten meal, and or almost passed out. He's just kind of like laying there. And one of the players went up and bought him a drink, but they didn't inquire any further. So I'm like, okay, that guy, I don't know what's going on with him right now. But if they ever ask about him, they ask the bartender or something later on, they go, there was a guy here a couple of weeks ago. What was his deal? I'll come up with it then. And then in that moment, maybe it's something I need. It's a tool I have in the box to be able to use. So that's kind of how I do it. I'll just throw these things out there, and then I kind of put the pieces together later. Because I find players don't need the puzzle. If you think about the whole campaign as a puzzle, players don't need every piece of the puzzle in place. They don't need it perfect. Not all the puzzles pieces even have to come from the same puzzle box. As long as they kind of form a beautiful picture in the end, that's what the players care about. Sure, there's a couple pieces missing. Sure, those don't actually fit there, but they kind of are forced in and make sense. They don't look at those. They just look at the grand picture, and that's what they remember. And that's what I try to tell people as first-time DMs, don't stress. Your players, good players, will forgive and forget, where they're going to remember the amazing moments and the amazing failures and how you make those epic, much more than they're going to worry about, oh, you forgot about this one tiny little plot point that would have changed everything, maybe.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that as a storyline will develop, you'll start having these strings that kind of go off, and then you can retie them back into the storyline, and there's a certain point where the narrative just becomes organic, where it's the players dictating, like, this is where we want to go. They have enemies, they have allies, they have this, they have that, and I know that at the beginning, like, it's completely not that. Like, it's for me personally, I know when I start off the storyline, it tends to have to be a little bit more linear, because players don't really have anywhere to go. They don't have any information, and I really don't feel like giving them a huge data dump of like stuff. Like, I actually tried to do that, where I remember I wrote down all these details for this world, and then I gave it to them. And there were some pros and some cons. Like, some of the pros were like, some of the players had read through them early on, and what was funny was that they would be like going up to a town, and there's like a sun and a shield. And it's like, wait a second, I remember reading that in Ben's packet 2 months ago. Like, what are they called? They're called the Exalted Ones. And like, oh, they're bad news. Like, and it's actually funny because it's almost like a genuine, like, that's what someone in the world would think. Like, oh, right. I've heard bad stuff about these guys, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's a great idea. I haven't done packets like that in a very long time. And I went into this new campaign. I talk a lot about it because it's the only campaign I run right now. But I went into this campaign going, I'm not going to be able to keep track of anything. I had a bunch of my players volunteer as what we call scribes. They're taking notes and writing up all the downtimes and the adventure journals for our website. And I just had to go in going, they're going to know the world better than me.
Oh,
so a lot of times in the world, because I probably have 90 or 100 NPCs at this point over 17 weeks. It's an insane amount of information for one person to try to remember. So a lot of times I'm like going, hey, scribes, who the heck is this person again? What was their name? I remember they're like this, they do this, and in the middle of the game, and it doesn't seem to interrupt the flow too much.
Yeah.
But we're also kind of a loosey, kind of fun, goofy group anyway. But a lot of times I'll do it if it's a serious moment, I'll do it behind the scenes. I'll just ask one of them directly, and they always have the information for me, and it helps out a lot. So if you're doing a large scale campaign, just ask your players. I'm sure that they would be glad to help you out in those moments. It's not you don't have to remember everything as a DM. I think that's something a lot of people think, like, I have to know everything. You don't. You really don't.
One of the things I will say also on the flip side with like open world is I have met some players and some groups on occasion that actually do not like the open world or the sandbox style. Because the thing is that one of the core components of like the sandbox style is that you put a lot of onus on the players to like talk to each other and figure out where they want to go. And there are some players who actually don't like that. And that was really surprising to me. Or there's like with open world games, like sometimes you can get a piece of information. You can go to an island, you can fight some people and find out you're in the wrong location. It was totally somewhere else, and then come back. And when you talk about an open world, like sometimes a core component of those games are getting lost, or like oh, we're looking for this information, and then you find out another piece of information to something else completely unrelated, and it's going to matter later on. And once again, it was very surprising to me, but very early on, I would find that there were actually some players who don't like getting lost. They don't like, oh, we just go off randomly and then we talk to some people and maybe, there are some players who actually prefer a more like every character that we meet is involved in the main storyline or something like that.
Right.
And
those people, sorry, go ahead.
And once again, I want to say that it's like, it really depends. Like there's a lot of veteran gamers where it has to be sandbox. They really want to have that input. They really want to have that narrative control. But there are some people who are coming into it that I've seen who they just kind of like, look, I just want an in and out storyline. I don't want to be faffing about in the woods for like 5 sessions and then eventually fight a monster or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you there. But what I look at what some people might call a railroad-like game. You're on the tracks, and you might have 1 or 2 branches where you got to kind of make decisions, but it usually comes back to the same point. Those types of games can be very cinematic. They're very like movies. It's like we have the plot, we're going to be playing through it. Mm-hmm. We know where the end goal is. Like you go into Curse of Strahd, you're going to be facing Strahd. There's no question. Yeah. It's like that's the point.
Yeah, that's the point.
And in open worlds, it has its drawbacks. Analysis paralysis is a huge thing. When people have too many choices, they will sit and talk about those choices a lot. I run into that all the time where it's like, okay, well, we need to do this or this or this or this or this. We have like 5 different things we need to explore right now. What do we want to do? Well, let's eat lunch and talk about it for 3 hours.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, that's not helpful.
Yeah, and I will say there are ways, like if there are things in open worlds that people don't like, there are ways to mitigate those. So it's like, maybe you like open world, you just don't like this style of open world.
Yes,
and then
there's a lot. That's the other thing. There's a lot of different styles.
Yeah, and as far as like railroading and stuff like that, there's different interpretations. And with railroading, for me, like if a GM presents me a storyline and it's a linear storyline, that inherently isn't a big deal. Like I'm like, okay, whatever. But where I immediately kind of balk at is when it's a linear storyline and they also happen to be micromanaging our decisions of like, okay, you're going to be talking to this guy and you Paladin are going to be saying this and you are going to do that and you're going to do that. And
that's a little much.
And so it's like if someone presented a storyline, it's like, okay, you're going to be fighting, Strahd or something. That in and of itself, it's like, okay. But if they are suddenly like going through and talking, you do this, that's where I draw the line. I'm like, look, that I have to have the control over.
Give
my
me the
character.
goal. You got to get this item from this person. Let me figure out how to do it. Do I want to be social about it? Do I want to try to blackmail them? Do I want to go and steal it? Do I want to kill them for it? Let me have that level of control. And then it becomes almost like a puzzle game. It's like we just have to solve the different steps to get to the end, which is a great way to play. It's just a different style. And approaching it like that with that mentality of it's not a matter of where we're going, but it's just a matter of how do we get there and make sure that we get the most gain and lose the least.
Yeah.
And I think that's a neat way of thinking about those types of campaigns. And again, as long as, and there's a difference between being on the rails and being railroaded, in my opinion. And railroaded means that, like what you said, the DM's like, no, you can't go talk to that bartender. Whereas being on the rails means you can talk to the bartender, she's going to give you similar information, or she's going to lead you to the same conclusion. That's being on the track. It's like, okay, so this is definitely what we need to do, is just confirmation, as opposed to, no, you can't talk to that person. You get there and you're being beaten up because they don't want to talk to you. It's like, wait, what? Why? And now, because all of a sudden that to me is like, what did we do to them? We got to figure that out. How do we make amends with the bartender?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also worry that sometimes when it comes to railroading, I think that sometimes people accuse GMs of railroading just for having input in the storyline, or just trying to talk to the players, like, where do you guys want to go? Like, and stuff like that. Like, oh, you're railroading. And it's like, look, a GM's got to talk to the players and figure out where they want to go and stuff like that.
My number one rule is communication is key. In all of D&D, you need to talk to your players. You need to, start with a session 0, all of that. But in the moments like that, it is most important. And I am not always the best in those moments to be, especially when in an open world where the players are just taking their time with things. And being on stream, it's like, okay, you've taken 45 minutes to try to make this decision. Maybe the audience might enjoy us moving on with that. And it's hard to bring that up in the middle of all of that. Whereas on a home game, I'd let them talk about whatever they wanted. It's their time, it's my time too, but I'm enjoying listening to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely am involved with the players in terms of, like, if two of the players or one of the players like, oh, I'm going to have 3 hours to myself to do this thing. I'm like, look, that's too much time. We kind of we got to okay, you have a half an hour. You've been the spotlight. We're going to have to kind of move it around and stuff like that.
Right.
And I remember there was one time they were going into a dwarven capital. And one of the players wanted to go into the Underdark because he heard the Drow are capturing slaves. I want to end racism by going in there and having a conversation with the Drow, and then turning there, having freeing the slaves and stuff like that. So we wanted this big storyline. And the problem was that there was an evil necromancer who was threatening to destroy the world. And so the players were split on which one they wanted to do, and it was a pretty even 4 on one side and then 1 on the other side. And we literally had the conversation out of character. I just said out of character as a GM, what do you guys want to do? And I even said look, if you guys are interested in this plot line, we can develop an entirely new plot line for you guys to go into the Underdark. And we had a conversation of okay, what if we first fought the evil necromancer and then went to the Underdark? Would you be okay with that? Would you be interested in that? And they said yes. And so I was like, okay, we'll probably do that then, or something like that.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I'm completely with you there. I think it's tough when you're dealing with players split like that on exactly what they want to do, especially. And I'm all for players wanting to take their own directions with things, but there are certain things. Converting the Drow is a lifetime thing, and you still might not succeed. It's not like I'm going to go down there and make some charisma checks, and all of a sudden, you know what? You're right. We don't need slaves. Here you go.
And so it was going to be
that's a huge undertaking.
As a I might even be really generous and say okay, you guys go on a mission for the next 5 levels, and then you free the slaves, and there's this one person who's just been leading the Drow, and you kill that person or something like that, and that.
Yeah.
And then you like start the process, and then like
you start seeding the descent of this idea within the drow, and maybe in a few generations, maybe there'll be some change. You know?
Yeah, there'll be some change or something like that. And so that's what I was going to do. But once again, I had to have that conversation like out of like I'm not talking to your characters. I want to know, like, as players and GM, what do you guys want to do? Because I also worry that sometimes people will have this conversation where they'll have this conversation in character, and it's like, does your character actually want to go there, or are you just saying it like I'm going to go down there and end racism? Like, is that you as a player? Like, do you as a player want to go down there, or is it just your character saying that, or something? Right. And it was like, even he was talking to the Dwarven King at the time, and the Dwarven King was like, yeah, no, fuck that. We aren't going down there. And I explained to him, I was like, look, that's the dwarf talking, not the GM. Like, if we can reason together, but the Dwarf King is not having any of your shit.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to a player, that idea that the character is doing something the player doesn't want to do, there are times when that's appropriate. And then there's times when it's not. And in those moments when it's not, the term that's been thrown out there is called my guy syndrome. It's like, well, my guy wouldn't do that, or my guy would absolutely do that. You shouldn't use that as a justification for doing something insanely crazy, stupid, or rude. It's just not a good reasoning just because your guy would do it. Well, maybe your guy isn't the right type of hero for this situation then. So either he needs to change, or you need to maybe think of a new character. And I've had to tell people that before.
Oh my God. It's like, I know that people, we have our characters, we get really close, like, hey, I wouldn't do this or something. But whenever it's like out of game, like it's causing conflicts of like, no, your characters can't do this because I wouldn't let you do that. It's like, because the problem is that if you have one player who's like that and he has one particular thing, that's fine. It's like, okay, that's a little bit irritating. But when you have 5 people, and they all have their own little quirks of like, we wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do this. It's like, how am I supposed to get the group together if none of you guys will work? We wouldn't be in the same group.
Exactly. This group would not exist like this. You are not heroes that people would tell stories about. So why are we trying to tell this story? I've had situations like that. One of the big ones, though, one of the big rules I have is your character should, parentheses, will never do something that takes away another character's agency. You should not be stopping another player from playing the game. If you're doing that, you are role-playing poorly. I won't say wrong, but poorly. Because there are situations where PvP works, where player versus player works.
That was something very surprising, is that I have seen some PvP where it has worked, but, and this is a big but, it really depends on the players. It really depends.
So when I started my first West Marches style campaign with 11 players. One of the rules I had was, you can have conflict. You can bring in a character who is racist against one of the other players. You have 2 weeks worth of game to resolve that. If you can't resolve it in 2 weeks, your character needs to leave. Those are I know that's a really tough, because we were playing real time like we are now. So 2 weeks is 2 weeks in game, and that's really hard to overcome. Half orcs killed my brother, so I don't want to, I don't want to be around half orcs, and 3 members of the party are half orcs. So it's like, but no, you have 2 weeks to resolve that. Maybe a hashtag not all half orcs, or something. You got to figure out what it is. You have 2 weeks, and if you're not good with that, don't play this character. That is kind of where we're at.
There was one time I had this guy. He was playing a paladin. And his quirk was that he hated undead. And there were these 2 guys, and they made characters, and they brought them in. And one of the guys is playing as a revenant. And then the other player's like, Ben, how could you do that? My character hates undead. And the thing is that, to me, so first when he said that, I hate undead, like, I thought like, it's just a little quirk. But to him, it was like, this is the core of my character. I can't play this character. And so to me, it's like, I hate the color blue. Like, okay, whatever. It's like, no, you don't understand. Like, I can't have a blue.
I go to a murderous rage.
Like, I would murder him or something like that. And so
I'm going to eat myself out the nearest window and plummet to my death.
Yeah, and so it was that first problem of I didn't realize how core it was to his character, and then they met up, and then it just, oh my god, like there were all these problems because because the guy was like lying, like, what? No, I'm not undead. I just happen to look like that. I'm just an illusion. And then he's like, he touches him, he's not an illusion. So it's like, look, like I would try and kill him, or something. And then he's like, okay, I'm a paladin. I'll pray to my god. I'll ask God, hey, what do you think about this guy? And then he's talking to the GM, and I'm like, no, he's evil. Fuck him up, or something. And then I was like, okay, never mind. No, he says, no, this guy's cool. You should hang with him. And he's like, okay, but it's like he was not horrendously happy about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of those problems could be solved with a good session 0, where you talk about, your characters a little bit in depth and learn about each other. But if you do something like Adventures League or something like that, or even just kind of impromptu pickup games, it's tough to do that sometimes.
Yeah, it's with this, the problem is that people were coming in and leaving. We would have 2 people come in one week, and then 2 people would drop, and then 1 person would come in, and then 3 people would leave, and then 2 people would come in. And so it was like, I remember someone was asking me, like, what's the tone of your session? It's like, tone? Like, look, I'm trying to build it around the players, and I don't know how many players I'm going to have, and stuff like that.
Chaos. Chaos is the tone of every session.
Chaos. Right? Yeah, it was and so it was very difficult for me to have, like, to view it as, like, I am going to be telling a singular story, because it'd be like, early on, they got a mission, and only one of the players came back from the mission that they recognized. There was
that plot is dead.
Yeah, we had a plot line actually a while back where the players got jumped. So there was a noble family. They paid for them to go off on this mission and get this item. The players find out that the item is this powerful necromancy item, and so they just take it. And what happens is the noble family comes after them to get the item back and hunt them down for revenge. And the thing is that only one of the players had been there and made the agreement, and everyone else had been swapped out. So it was like Iron Jaw comes up and it's like, you betrayed us. And then he's like, no, we didn't betray you. It was a completely different group. It's like, oh yeah. Anyway, we're still coming after you.
No problem.
So,
all right, that sounds great.
It was funny because it's like you had this villain. I had this idea for this guy who's this villain, like tracking the party, trying to figure out where they are, hunting them down and stuff like that. And then as time went on, as the players got swapped out, it's like everyone's been swapped out at this point. Like, why does he want revenge anymore?
Yeah.
It'd be like if he was after the Avengers and then Tony Stark left and then Captain America left and then someone else left. And so it's just the name.
Idea of you.
The idea.
You have the same group name. That's enough. Oh, that's ridiculous. All right, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to go on to the next one real quick here. Huff and Puffin. So this one is me wanting to ask you about how you decide what to take out of your stories and turn into your animated videos, which are amazing. And we'll go ahead and get the link up again.
Thanks.
Don't leave now. How do you make those decisions? I mean, it's you are definitely a very good entertainer. You definitely know what to pull to make at least an entertaining story. I'm sure there's many different ways you could do it, but I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in your video or in your stories that's like, well, I could use that, but I think that I'm going to use this instead. And how do you know when to stop telling a story? Because you've got hours of entertainment and game, and you turn it into a 10-minute video, and it's hilarious.
I don't know. Next question.
Perfect. Great answer.
Actually, so it is funny because it's like that is something that I to this day still struggle with, because it's like you have this 6-hour, let's say you take a session, that's still 6 hours worth of material, and trying to get it down to 10 minutes, and it's like, and there's. Whenever you finish the session, there's some stuff that really stands out in your mind of this was really funny. And there's also a struggle where you're trying to tell a narrative. And what I find is that people really like the stories that are set up, build up, middle conflict, and then payoff. They have a narrative flow. And the problem is that sometimes when I look back at the session, I'm like, oh, I was reaching into my sack, and instead of pulling out an orange, I pulled out an apple. And it's like, I can't make a video on that. That's not a story.
Nothing else. I want you to make that video, what you just said, a 30-second video of just that, and see how many views you get, because I would bet it would do amazing.
I remember
and no explanation, just that.
I remember there was a joke where I was like, I had to I was going to make a video on like my worst session or something like that, or sessions that were really boring. And it was like, I spent 10 hours fighting kobolds. Roll credits, end of video.
Right.
like that's like, how do you make a video on that? And so sometimes you can take something that's like humorous, and then you can have like kind of build up for it, and then a middle. Sometimes they're just like funny bits that kind of have a narrative theme running through them. Probably one of the hardest ones that I made was the Aligaros video, the video on the legendary Aligaros and his backstory and stuff like that. And with that video was so hard getting into, because I was looking back at this previous campaign that I had played over a year, and there's all these funny moments that happen, but I'm like, I don't see a story there. It's just like, this thing happened and it's funny. This thing happened. And so I started writing out a script where I'm just like, this thing happened, that's funny. This thing happened, that's funny. This thing that happened, that's funny. And then as I'm looking through it, I'm like, oh, it's kind of centering around Aligaros, how he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know magic. He doesn't have a backstory and stuff like that. And so then I decided, okay, that's going to be the theme of that video. And then I'm just going to have that narrative, like the build up and payoff. But even then, like, that video is not my strongest video. Like, a lot of the videos that people really enjoy, that people are like, yes, this is your best video, are the ones that have, once again, some kind of start pitch, build up, middle conflict, and then a resolution. People really enjoy that like narrative structure. And we also have to remember, like, when we go in to tell these stories, that there's a story going through, which is about, a group of adventurers who run off to the mountains to go slay a dragon. But there's also another story being told there, which is about 4 friends who get together to pretend to slay a dragon. And in some ways, that's in some ways, to some people, it's more interesting about that, because they want to know about like how the paladin's been sleeping with the other friend's wife or something like that, or those kind of politics. Like, they want to know about the in-game conflicts between the characters, or the people, the people's reaction. Like, when something happens and they have that reaction, it's a real reaction. It's like, oh my God, like, how could this happen? And so you get that like interesting narrative thing where you get to have these fictional elements happening, but the reactions are to real people, in the same way that, like, with a game show, you have these fictional points and you have these made up games and they don't really do anything, but you have these gifts or these presents or stuff that people want, and the reactions when they go, no, and they fail, that emotion that's there, that's real. That's what people are a lot of times very, very like interested in. They're interested in the real reactions to things.
Absolutely. And I was going to say that you have an amazing balance in your thing about the story that's happening in the game, and then kind of the interactions of the players themselves and their reactions to a lot of what, well, your characters do sometimes, or what's happening in the story. But I was going to ask, when you're a player, especially with like Absurd and a few others, your DM seems overly critical of you sometimes. Is that an embellishment a little bit, or is your DM just really like always looking at you like that?
I think so. Sometimes I'll say stuff and then the GMs will just be like, what? Like they will be critical, like, or they like, no, like sometimes what'll happen is I think something's like really funny, and then everyone else is just like, this is not funny.
It's just for
like,
me.
To me.
It's just for
and
me.
So it's that reaction. But I think in addition, I project, like, in the characters in my narratives, I project my own fears and the negative emotions that kind of come off of it. Like, for example, I'll be running a game and I'll talk about how my players, they've caught on to my bullshit. They know everything's bunk. They aren't having me, or something. And sometimes you're like, as a GM, you're trying to get a read off of the players and you really don't know how they feel. And so I'm kind of projecting those negative emotions on there and just talking about, like, it's almost kind of like, this is what it would look like. It's like, they aren't having me. They've got me all figured out and stuff. But in other aspects, it's like, when things will happen, there'll be a multitude of different emotions. Like, for example, there was one time where the players teleported to the moon, and there's a multitude of emotions where I'm like, I'm kind of excited, I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also like really tense and I'm nervous and I have a plan and it's not doing the thing and this is what's going on. And so there's multiple emotions that are going on. And so I focus on just the emotions that are interesting. And sometimes the emotions that are interesting are the conflict, are the people who are like, why? No, that didn't happen, but their understanding of it. But the understanding maybe doesn't make the best video.
Exactly.
There's a multitude of emotions that happen, and it's in the same way that it's like, I remember there was a cartoonist who Shen, who he makes online comics, and he often talks about being part of an internet community, how the internet is like completely trashing you, and life is always after you and trying to knock you down and stuff like that. And people were writing to him saying like, are you depressed? Like, are there problems in your life? And we all know that that's true about the internet. Like, the internet is an amalgam of different emotions. It's like, it's passionate and it's intense and it's encouraging, but it's also discouraging, and it's like critical of you. And it's like, and then with life, like there's things that get you up, there's things that beat you down, there's this and that. And he focuses on, and so some of his comics kind of focus on like some of the more negative stuff, like how he had made this comic of like, hi, I'm a creative person. The internet comes by and like breaks his painting is like, that's so you remember it. And it's like, the internet is many different things, and that is just one aspect that he focuses on in that comic.
Yeah, I think that is a very good point. My games, I focus a lot on dramaticness. We call ourselves the soap opera of D&D because we focus on the role play and the players and the drama of it and their lives and ups and downs, but mostly downs. I follow the Joss Whedon philosophy of storytelling that no character can be too happy for too long. You've got to take stuff away from them, and we focus a lot on their lives. And like right now, the chat is talking about one of our characters who got one of the other characters' mom's pregnant. There's a lot of things going on like that because that's what we focus on. That's the story that we like to tell. But there's a million other things going on in the world around it. It's just those are the emotions we like to focus on, at least for this game. And I think that that's a really good point. That you can find that mood and that theme and in your videos as well.
Yeah. I will also say there's a few other things. One is that I think when people first approach like telling a story from an RPG, they're focused on, oh, this is what we spent the most time on, so therefore it's the most important. And it's like, no, like whatever is the funniest, whatever is the most dramatic, like that's the thing that you really
where's the story?
Where's the story? Or something. And so with the videos, like we might spend like 2 hours just making characters, and that just gets skipped the fuck over because it's like it doesn't matter. Or there's other stuff involved with like I remember actually before I did the YouTube thing, I was write on a blog, and I would just kind of like write an RPG replay and put it up there. And there were other friends who did similar stuff to this, where they would write up the stories or write up like, this is what's going on in my game world. And what we found like very early on is the fact that we would cut out a lot of the fourth wall jokes. We would cut out a lot of the humor, stuff like that, or like the players bantering or the metagaming and stuff like that. And what we found was that people really liked it. Like, it's funny. In some ways, it's the best part about it is because people, like if it's Grayson, the elven warrior, like people don't really connect with that, but they can connect more with the person playing that character. So like you always have to remember that it's like it's a person playing that character. And that being said, I mean, there's a lot of great games online and stuff like that, a lot of stories that have come out of that. It's just that for me, I like to focus on the fact that we are players sitting around to play a game, and there's drama that's happening there, and the drama is the players and with their interactions with their own characters and the interactions between the other characters.
Absolutely. So speaking of the internet beating you up a little, just playfully, Fennec, the Nerdsmith community director, did just say that she uses your videos as what not to do's in her game.
Oh yeah,
so
definitely.
I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah. Thanks, Fennec.
No, yeah, and I definitely, the thing is that when I go into making a video, I don't consider my videos as like, oh, here's a story about how everything went over fine and everything went perfectly. It's just daisies and stuff like that. It's like the games where it's like there's a trash can, and then the trash can turned into a big trash can fire and then lit the other buildings on fire, and then you had 12 trash can fires. Like, that's a story. That's something you can work with. Like, there's something there. And so I think, sometimes I'll tell these stories and they're like, I don't portray myself in the best light in my videos. And I think, and that's intentionally done. And part of it is just because I have to accept responsibility for the stuff that happens at my table. But it's also just because it's like, oh man, this went over like really bad. It's a great story. But there are a few times where I will run something And I disagree with the community where they're like, this is going to go over terribly. And I tried it, and I'm like, look, it works. Like, it worked out really well. Like, the players really enjoyed it. Like, here's the thing. Here's the funny part was, I remember there was a video I ran, which was like an absurdly difficult mission where the players were first level. They didn't have any resources. They had to just kind of sneak around and stuff like that. And it was like, and I got the module and I read it. I'm like, holy crap. Like, this is what we're doing. I'm talking to the coordinator. I'm like, look, we got to do something about this because this is ridiculous. And he's like, no, we're just going to run it straight. I'm like, okay, sure. And so I ran it, and the players loved it. They freaking loved it. And it just blew me for a loop because it's like, we put them into like a really bad spot, but it was the way that the module was run. It was not a power fantasy. It was like, you're up against these things that will straight up murder you. You know, it's 100 against 1, you know, go for it. Like, what are you going to do? And the players really, really liked having to outsmart and kind of work around the different threats that were there. And it really showed me. And so sometimes what will happen is like, you'll get a module and it's like on paper, it's like this, like the players will hate this. And then sometimes you can run it and you can be really surprised that actually they really, really enjoy it.
There was a module out, and in 3.5, it was an adventure. It was called Midnight, and I never had a chance to pick it up. But the premise that was pitched to me, the elevator pitch was, it is Lord of the Rings, it's Tolkien type world, fantasy world. If Sauron had won.
I've heard of that.
You are heroes that are trying to fight against the darkness in a world that doesn't want you.
Yeah.
In a world that is like, no, don't do anything. You're going to get us killed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what an amazing story that would be. At the time, my players had wanted nothing to do with it. I pitched that to them, and they're like, oh my God, no way.
Yeah.
That's insurmountable odds. It's impossible. And I said, well, that's the point. It's impossible. It's dark. It's gritty. Back in AD&D, it would be like going to Ravenloft. In Ravenloft, you had second level goblins that would do permanent charisma damage because they would chew off your nose. It's like, that's frightening and scary and sort of awesome on top of that.
Yeah.
You know, it's this just level of nitty gritty that's just incredible.
Yeah, because one of the things is that, like, let's say you take like Star Wars: A New Hope. Okay, it's a very, very gritty movie. Like, when you think about it, like, a lot of players wouldn't want to be Luke Skywalker in Star Wars: A New Hope, because when you think about it, like, it starts off, you know, the Imperials are after him, they kill his family, you know, he has no money, he goes to a place, and then he gets captured immediately, and then there's a big ass like Darth Vader, you know, and then he gets conscripted into the rebellion. Basically, he joins up with them, and then his entire fleet gets like mowed off and get killed and stuff like that. Like, it's a really,
Spoilers.
really like, yeah. When you really stop and think about Star Wars: A New Hope, like, it's dark. Like, a lot of players don't want to play as Luke Skywalker. Some really enjoy it, and some players would really like it because it's the fact that you have this adversity and your character is slowly overcoming it. And it's just like, you know, relentless pounding. And, but I will say that once again, like, sometimes the stories that are really, really dark, where you have that narrative swing. And I talk sometimes on this about narrative swing, where it's like, if you just have positive stuff happening all the time, some players really enjoy that because it's like, I am my character and I want my character to be happy. And if my character's happy, I'm happy. But other times players want that like narrative swing of, I want my character's family to get killed off screen because he's going to be miserable. And I am not my character. We have a separation between the two. I enjoy seeing him struggle because I am a viewer and also that character, if that makes any sense, or something like that. Yes,
absolutely. And that actually brings up another point. We can talk forever on all of this, but there's this.
Yeah, we can keep going if we want.
Are you okay to go a little bit longer?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Normally we go to 2, but I didn't want to overwhelm you with the idea.
Yeah, we can go to 2. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we can go.
This idea that we would talk about a lot about, you know, different strokes for different folks. So, you know, everyone has these different variations in where their thresholds are and things, and the level that somebody connects with their character is a huge threshold. I've had players that are like, that character is a completely different, separate entity. You can do anything you want. I don't care. And I've had other players who are like, this is me. This is my child. Anything that happens, it hits me, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And it's just very interesting that as a DM, you have to balance all of these things on so many different levels. We could do an entire 2 hours just on that one concept.
And here's the thing is that so there's a few things. One is the problem that sometimes players are not like in this camp or that camp. They alternate between the two. They're like, oh, I want this terrible things to happen and my family to die, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to kill off your daughter. It's like, no, like, and they're
not
doing
that thing.
Not that thing,
but not
that's
that
too
thing.
far. So or it's like, or they they'll just get to a certain point, or they'll have like a certain line that they get to where I want to see my character suffer, but to a point. And then here's another thing of sometimes people will tell you one thing, but then they'll react differently, because sometimes they'll say that because they think this is what you want to hear. Like that's the problem sometimes with session zeros, is that sometimes you'll be talking to different GMs and players, and I'm like, what do you guys want? It's like, oh, I want a gritty, like serious game. It's like, oh, okay. And then I serve them something gritty and serious, and they're like,
that's too gritty and serious.
It's like, oh, that's too, or like their interpretation for gritty and serious.
Tarantino.
Their interpretation for gritty and serious is different from my interpretation from gritty to serious. Like there's a huge spectrum there. And then in addition, you also have a problem where sometimes they'll say that just because like, this is what I know people say. But then when we get to the actual game, you see them drifting off to a different direction. Like I remember hearing a study where they said like, most people, if you ask them, how do you want their coffee? They want a dark, strong roast. And statistically, they said most people want milky, weak coffee or something like that. But no one says that because we don't even know that option's on the table, or we just think that's
you're supposed to like coffee that's dark and strong because that's coffee.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. It is difficult for to fight with that spectrum. Now, as a quick solution, and Angela, I'll talk about this in the future, and maybe you will too. It'd be nice to have you back at some point. To solve, there is a little bit of a house rule that Angela has discovered, and I don't have the sources for it. Maybe Angela can post if she's there. But it's called the knife philosophy or knife system. Basically, the idea is in session 0 before the game, as your characters are developing their characters, you have them give you a list of knives that they give you to stab them with.
Oh, okay.
Like here are 10 things that yes, you can go ahead and attack my parents, but don't attack my sister. You can go ahead and take all my money away, but please make sure I can still function as a character. And they give you these ideas of, here are things you can attack me with, here are things you can use to kind of twist and hurt me that I am completely okay with. And then we personally use the lines and veil system as here's a lot of places we don't want to go. But the knife system is a neat idea, because then you get the idea of, I can use all of these things to torture you with.
Yeah, because I think as the GM, like we instinctively err on the side of caution. Like we don't want to hurt the players, we don't want to discomfort them, and so we just sometimes will just completely avoid it. We don't even go there. And then you'll find out like later on, like a player was totally okay with that. Like, oh no, your sister, she's on the edge. And the player secretly wants the character to actually die here, but they don't know that or something. Or early on, we actually had a problem with like character deaths where I know that this is going to be surprising to a lot of other gamers, but in my games, characters would not die. Ever. Not the ones I was running, the ones I was playing in. Like a lot of the new GMs that I ran with would not kill off characters, period. And there was I made that video, why won't my character die? That wasn't the only one. I would play in a lot of games where the character was like go to 0, like on occasion they would get dropped to 0 and then immediately get rezzed or something like that. And I had to tell the GM like, look, I'm okay with them being killed off. And so I came from that with a different perspective of death, of character death, that I viewed character death as almost like a I don't know. It's like like something that the GM provided to the players. Like, I will allow you to let to retire the character, to die, and I will rewrite the game so that way your character is out of there and rewrite a new character in. Because a lot of times the GMs would not want to kill off characters because now I have to rewrite it. Now I have to have, like, we were building up all this narrative and this storyline, and then now the character's dead, and I can't do that. And so I view it as like a GM. Like, I will allow you to let the character die if you do not want the character anymore. And I will rewrite the story. Those storylines that we had, they will just get retired, and we'll bring in a new character with new storylines if that is what you want. And so I have a much more positive outlook on character death than I think a lot of other people.
It's different for me. If the person doesn't want to play the character anymore, if they're not having fun, absolutely, let's make it happen. I try not to allow players to die unless they make a mistake. That it needs to be their mistake in some way. I don't want to just be vindictive about it. And that can be just going up against the wrong enemy at the wrong time. So in general, I try not to have allow players to just die willy-nilly. But when I'm playing, which is very rare, I feel very much like Samuel L. Jackson from Star Wars. He reportedly said when they told him he's going to die, he said, "Just don't let me go out like a bitch." You know, so it's like, just as long as it's not just a stupid death. I don't want to just plummet off a building to my death or something. Sorry, Sam. But it's let it be meaningful. Let it mean something. Let it be significant. And then give me those moments after the fact. Let the players mourn or bury me or whatever if they can have time.
Because
I
I have run games where it's like, we're going to do dark and gritty realism. Like, if you get killed by skeletons, you get killed by skeletons. Like, who cares? And the problem is you realize very early on, like, oh, the players can't develop a narrative or something like that. And actually, I have not been someone to, like, I've ran, like, one encounter and then a character came, like, really close. But, like, you realize, like, really close early on, like, look, they can't develop a storyline if the characters keep getting killed off and, or something like that. And so it is good to have the characters kind of recurring and it not be too difficult. But it's like, on the flip side, I always have a problem with GMs who are like, you are not allowed to die. Like, I will not extend that to you. You just cannot have a new character. And it sucks because I'll play in a game for like a year and a half and I'm like, look, I want to play a new character. And they're like, but you've been playing for a year as this guy. It's like, yeah, that's why I want to make a new one.
Right. That's kind of the point. I can understand that. I try a year. My games are a little different because I do a lot of narration. I do very heavily. Like, we play 5 nights a week in my game. So we're going to, by the end of next year, easily a year and a half, we're going to be done with it. It's going to be over probably sooner than that. But for games that I've been playing for a very long time, it becomes hard, especially as you get disassociated with your character, when you have to wait between sessions and things. It can become difficult to want to maintain playing that character for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And again, that's yet another thing DMs have to kind of contend with, is this idea that some people are going to be so locked into their characters that they want to play this game forever. And then other people are like, well, okay, can we change? I'm great. I love this. And we've completed major things, but can we move on? Can we do something new?
I had a little bit of a thing where we had resolved a major storyline last week, and the players lost the campaign. And so some people were like, hey, I want to keep playing. And then other times we had been playing for several months. And so the players who had been playing for several months were more open to, doing a new thing. But then there were some players who had come in like 3 weeks ago and they're like, look, I've only been playing this guy for like 3 weeks. We just got rolling. To them, just got rolling. But it's like, and so, and the other thing for me is I was interested in running a game of Mutants and Masterminds, because it's like, that's a game like, I want to get back to. And I'll run like a D&D at Adventures League, and I've been playing it, for like 4 years. And so
right.
For me, I'm like, all right, let's do a Mutants and Masterminds game. And it was this thing where the players were kind of split. And so I basically did this thing of like, okay, we'll do Mutants and Masterminds for a bit. And then like 8 sessions down the line, we'll get back to that, which might even end up being its own problem of like, no, we want to continue. Like, we still haven't stopped so-and-so yet.
Yeah, exactly. So Mutants and Masterminds is probably going to be the first place you and I don't agree, and it's probably for another show we'll have to do. I would love for you to try to help me understand that game, because I played it several times.
Okay.
And I did not enjoy it, but I'm not sure if that's
no. I understand. I understand. I completely understand. I absolutely I hated it. Utterly hated it. I even opened up the pre-gen characters, and I was like, "These are trash. Like, I cannot play these things and stuff like that." There's a lot of the game has a tremendous amount of problems. Let me tell you something. Right off the bat, it's got a lot of problems. Stuff like that.
Now, did you enjoy 4th edition? I know you got into it in 4th edition, but did you ever play 3.5?
Oh. Okay, so here's the thing, is that I have played a little bit of 3.5. I've also played Pathfinder. I am familiar with that. It's a little bit complex, but it's fun. Then I played 4th edition, and one of the problems is that people ask me a lot of times, like, how I feel about 4th edition, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel. And it's like, and the issue is that we would play 4th edition, but we're all learning how Dungeons and Dragons works. And so there'll be issues that come up and we can't solve them. And then, or these problems came up, and it's like, is that 4th edition problem, or is it more of the system? And so when I look back at 4th edition, it's very like, I don't even know if I can accurately judge the system, because because we were all learning how our role-playing games work. And so it's difficult for me. But I will tell you that I had gotten the books a while ago, or I had gotten like PDFs, and I had pitched it to the friends. I'm like, hey, do you guys want to play this again? And I opened up the books and I looked at the characters, and I was just like, this system's not doing anything for me. Like, even evaluating as, let's pretend I'm going in this blind.
Sure.
And I open up a pre-gen character, like, it's just not I'm just not a huge fan, because it's like a character will have an ability where they hit someone and they give like a -3 to this other person, and this person gives a +2 to this person, and then this person gives this modifier. And then the fact is that a lot of the classes are reskinned versions of each other. So they'll have a lot of similar powers to each other. So like a bard plays very similar to a cleric. Like, it's almost like they just kind of swapped out some of the terminology. But they're still the same role. And so I'm looking at the system, and I'm just like, I like, even pretending, ignoring the years worth of experience that I have with it, I really don't want to get back into it. And if it was like a really awesome system, I would want to come back to it. I even pitched it to the friends. I'm like, hey, do you want to, just for nostalgia, play an old game of 4th edition? And the players were just like, even the people who had played 4th edition were just like, no, not really.
The thing that I really like the idea of when I went into 4th edition from 3.5, and I owned my game store right around when it was coming out. Sorry, I have to change this song. I know you can't hear. I love that it's a love-hate thing. Because what makes it great is what makes it horrible. Is that it was designed around the success and popularity of multiple or massively multiplayer online games. And they built it like that, where it's like you get these little powers and you have them on your little bar below you and little cards, and you can use them as you go. And it kind of took and made it at the time, simpler system than what 3.5 or Pathfinder was. And this idea that here you just have these things in front of you, you can just use them as you go, and it becomes tactical. And it was a fun experiment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was a success personally, but it was a fun experiment. And I think that's what made it not great. The point of an MMO is that everything is perfectly balanced. And if you look at these powers at different level, they're the exact same power, just flavored differently. And that's kind of what my issue is with Mutants and Masterminds, is it feels like it's always the same power, just a different flavor. There's not a lot of variety in what's actually happening other than how it's described. Now, I'm a very different person I was than back in 2000 whatever, when I was playing Mutants and Mastermind and 4.0, but that was my struggle then.
With fourth. Okay, so first off, with Mutants and Masterminds, like, so first off, I really like playing superhero RPGs, and I really like them, but it's like I rotate through a ton of them, because it's like whenever I pick up a superhero game, it's either so streamlined that it's like, ooh, you just have a token and you pay the token to use your power. It can be whatever you want. And it's like so streamlined that it's like, it's kind of bland. Or you do the opposite, where it's like super crunchy, where it's like very, very complex and very like deep, but it's like none of the players are ever going to experience that depth because they're just going to get like, they're just going to have like swirls in their eyes and get a headache the second they look at the system. And so basically the way that I run Mutants and Masterminds is the way that I have to run it is I'll look at the players and say like, what do you want to play? Like, oh, I want to play as a character who has like, who wears a duster and has like little tornadoes in his pocket, and he throws the tornadoes and they go around and grab people and pick them up and slam them into the wall. I'm like, oh, okay, this is what you buy this, you want this, you have to buy this is your power, you want this, and then I let them adjust the things. But it's like I have to kind of walk them through how you do the powers and stuff like that. And I will say that like one of the cool things about the Mutants and Masterminds is the fact that you get to reskin any of the abilities. So for example, if you want to say like, oh, I fire a rocket launcher and hits the ground and it detonates into syringes that heal people, like that's a perfectly viable power because you take the explosive area of effect and then you do healing and you twin the powers together or something like that, and then that's their ability. But that being said, like if you look at the core mechanics or the features of what's going on, it's like you're just taking damage and removing damage and adding damage and removing damage or something like that. Like if you actually look at the base mechanics of the game, like they're pretty kind of simplistic, and
which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that as a role-playing game. Now here's the big example of the problem that I had. My buddy, my best friend at the time, wanted to play a character called the Bullet. And the idea was that he could fly infinitely fast, and Mach 3 or whatever, and was completely invulnerable to damage, and would just fly his body into things to hurt it.
Mm-hmm.
Except that the GM or DM or whatever at the time said that he would also have to take basically the punching power to actually do the damage.
Yeah.
And he didn't have any more points. So he could fly infinitely fast and could not take any damage, but his mass and weight moving at Mach 3 did 0 damage to the enemies. And it's like, so there's a struggle there. But
no, I know. That's like, so one of the things is whenever people will tell me the pitch for the character, I will say like, you want to do this, you want to do this. Like when they're making okay, so first off, one of the things I should mention is that I've only played Mutants and Masterminds like 3 times or 2 times. Okay. So
you're an expert in my opinion.
So you actually probably have more experience, and so you're probably more qualified to evaluate the system. But I will tell you, like, I really want to play a superhero game, and the problem is that it's like this is the one,
this is the one that works.
Like, yeah, this is the one that works mechanically. So unfortunately, I'm kind of stuck with it. But I will say, like, when I go through the Hero's Handbook and make it, I always have to make sure that it's like players have a good image of the character that they want, and then if along the way I'm talking to them back and forth, like as they're doing the character, I'm talking to them like, what do you want, and making sure that they get the character the way that they want it, so that way they don't. And I've explained this problem where someone makes an assassin, they max out their sniper rifle, and they don't put any ranks in the hit value. So you are a secret assassin who, if you hit something, you destroy it, but you can't hit anything.
Right, exactly. Like so it's a Hail Mary is your name. It's like, just maybe you'll make it, but it's very unlikely. But if you do, it's perfect.
I will say that I had 3 players make the characters when I was running the Disaster Squad game, the Gravity Power, and then someone else had Poison Ivy, the plant. And then we had another guy who did animate objects, where you could animate them and bring them to life. And the players all really enjoyed the characters, but you really had to like really take the time to interpret the powers, where it's like, okay, you are like, she'll like, technically speaking, the girl, Poison Ivy or Heidi, her powers are just ranged attack and then create object. And those are the only 2 and it's limited to plants or something like that. Like those are so like her character is very, very simplistic on the surface, but like if you can describe it in a cool and interesting way, oh, the plants are coming out, there's thorns coming in, like that adds a lot of depth to it. But I understand that, like, simplistically speaking, like mechanically speaking, it's like it's a simple power. It's like there's nothing going on.
And I'll be very straight. I think I might change my mind now with the experience I've gained over the past 11 or 12 years since I've played, and being a little more open-minded than I used to be to that type of thing, I think I'd be probably more open to it. But those are the problems I had at the time with it.
I know. I will tell you right now, it's like the problem is superhero systems always have these issues where
Because
it's like
superheroes are so
they're
varied.
so wonky, one-sided, and it's like if they try and put a cap on it, then it's like, hey, superheroes aren't about having a cap. Like I remember there's Venture City, which I got, and for Fate, and the original way that you make the Fate character is you assemble your skills in kind of a balanced tree, and I'm like, look, superheroes, they don't have a balanced tree of skills. They
There's
are
not,
like,
and that's the problem.
they'll have one
everyone,
thing that's like an 8, or something.
Yeah, to make everyone equally successful takes a very, very good storyteller who can adapt to a lot of situations, but also making equally bad. So the one time I did play the game, the DM at the time, I said, I'm kind of, I was very self-aware. I'm a power gamer. I like just being really good at things. But I jokingly said, I said, if we're going to play that game, if you really want me to play that badly, if you want me to take my time to play this game that I don't see a lot of success in for me, I'm going to try to break it. And he said, bring it on. And so I made a gravity controller and maxed out gravity with all the points, which he gave us a lot, I guess 120 or something. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And after 4 sessions, he came back to me, even after creating a character specifically to combat my abilities, forgetting I had 2 allies that he couldn't do anything about. He gave up. He's like, you win. You have to change characters. I can't deal with your gravity.
No, I understand, because it's like in that game you'll have character abilities which are like immortality, invulnerability, indestructible and stuff like that. And as I'll be talking to the players, I'll be making sure that it's like something that I can actually play against or play with. Because if they make a character that's like, I'm immune to damage, like actually I did have a player who made it immune to damage, but he was actually fun to play with because we were playing a one shot, and so it's like you get it now. Like everyone wanted it. You get to make a character that's immune to damage.
Yeah.
Good luck to you. But he had some super strength, but it would be like he'd get hit with like a cannonball shot and he'd go through the side of like 3 buildings and come out the other end, and that was fun to describe. Right. But in terms of like, you do wonder about that kind of thing. Like, what's the longevity of that kind of game? Like, how long can it run? Like, because it's like, if it doesn't have any strengths, they have different strengths and weaknesses. Like, would players get bored of it? But isn't that the same as D&D and stuff like that? And then you also have this problem of like players accidentally, like, D&D is made so that way players will have a variety of different things, even if they don't want them. But right. in a game like Mutants and Masterminds, players can make characters that aren't fun to play, and they will, in their head, like, ooh, this sounds really fun to play, and they'll make it, and they'll be like, oh, this is actually really not a fun character to play. And so in a class system where you buy the class and they just give you a whole host of powers, you are not allowed to make a defective character. You cannot be defective. You're just not allowed to do that. Right. But in Mutants and Masterminds, if you want to play a defective character, like, you can. And some players really want that. Like, they think that's fun. And then the vast majority of people would actually find that not fun, unsurprisingly. Right.
I don't mind the idea of defective characters as long as you can still contribute something. In D&D, one of the campaigns I was playing in, I created a dex-based barbarian, which means that about half the powers of the barbarian I don't get. They're all strength-based. So I get no benefit from them. And for the first 2 sessions, I did nothing but use prestidigitation, and I wore no armor, and I wore a robe, and people thought I was a wizard. So it was a lot of fun. But when he got pissed off, and when it was not a human person they were fighting, he would unleash the dexterity, and it was brutal.
But what's interesting also about that character is that they're still like, you still have these powers and you still have the stuff that you contribute. They're like, you cannot play a peasant who can't do anything.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Like,
right.
in class.
Although that would be kind of interesting to play like a level 0 peasant with 2 hit points, and I'm going to go adventuring with you guys. Yay!
And so it's like to some extent, they require that you have to have these powers. And actually, when I was first got into D&D, like, I want to play as a peasant. Like, why am I not allowed to play as a peasant? And I think for a lot of people that would just be boring. Like, even if you think in your head like that might be fun, some people would think that was fun. I just want to say, like, some people would think it'd be really fun. A lot of people, like, they get bored of it like really quickly. I know I had my brother actually in this campaign said, I want to play as a bum. I want to play as a useless guy. What's the most useless character? And it was like, I want to play as a gnome monk. Like, and what was funny was that he got all these powers, and so he was planning on underselling his character, but then he would come in clutch in certain situations, and he found out, like, I actually kind of like doing that on occasion.
It's kind of like the drunken master idea, though. This idea that, you know, it's just some, you know, he doesn't looks like some drunk guy, but he's actually this big, powerful monk that can kick your ass.
Yeah.
Have you ever played Dr. Magnet Hands?
I have not played Dr. Magnet Hands.
Have you ever heard of Dr. Magnet Hands?
I have not. There's a story here. You can tell from the title.
Magnet Hands is we did when we were preparing for our big stream. We did a lot of indie games like Honey Heist. I'm sure you've heard of, and I'm trying to think of the others. Everyone is John is a popular one. We even created our own. Dr. Magnet Hands was one of them, and it is a indie, 200-word superhero. Well, it's actually more than that, but it's a superhero game, and it might be kind of fun to goof around with sometime with you. Basically, the idea is it's very simple. There's only very minimal dice rolling. It's a short 1 hour type campaign, but what you do is you write down a bunch of weird things onto sheets of paper, or in our case, we did a random chart. You put them all into a chart, and you draw 4 of them, and from them you have to choose your superhero name and your 3 powers. And then you have to use your 3 powers over 3 scenes defeating Dr. Magnet Hands. And it is very, very silly and crazy. Like, we've had a whipped cream gun, or, rollerblade, or what was it? Roller derby equipment, as superhero powers. And it's just really neat and goofy. And if you're into superhero games, it's actually a really fun one.
That sounds really cool.
Look at. So we've got about 3 minutes left. Is there anything that you want to talk about, or anything you want to say to everyone? Our vast audience that we have here, a lot of which came because you were on our show, and I do want to thank you for that.
Thanks.
But any parting words of wisdom? Put you on the spot right now.
Yeah, and I guess as parting words of wisdom, I might just say, like, once again, it's about, like, we talk about the storylines and stuff like that, and it's a lot of it comes down to the players. It's their interactions, it's the drama that they have, and the interactions that they have with their own characters and stuff like that. And just, trying to, I guess my final message is, I guess also another thing is just on the message of my videos is just, I'm trying to talk about kind of like the real emotions that happen, the real struggle that we have, and just the fact that as a GM, you want to go into it and you want to sit down and have a session 0, and the players all tell you what they want, and then you give them everything they want, and it's a perfect game, and you run it to the end. And there's all these codes that we build up over the time. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and like you just don't take it seriously. Like, you just you got to play it. You got to play the ball where it lies. And you just kind of improvise and just go off.
And it's more fun when you do it that way.
Yeah, and just don't take it too seriously, or think like I'm breaking some code that's out there to like not do this or don't do this. Like, I remember I was playing a game and I split the party got split up, and one group was in one part of the dungeon, this other group was in another part of the dungeon, and the players had a blast. Like, whereas like they were like, okay, this person's doing this and this person's doing this, and we're going, and there was like a cliffhanger every time they alternated between the different groups. And it made me realize just like I had built up all these different like the structure to how a game is supposed to be run, and then I would find that you could run things outside of it and the players would really enjoy it. Or even with like modules, where I would avoid modules, or I'd have some idea of how I wanted the game to go, and I'd read a module and it's like, today the players are going to be running a bakery, and I'm like, oh god, bakery. And then sometimes the players would really enjoy it and you'd learn something new about it.
It's really amazing what can happen when a DM kind of throws away their bias. It took me a long time to learn how to do that. I probably 15 years of role playing before I learned how to kind of throw away a lot of my bias and start looking at doing things differently. And it's thanks to people like you and Matt Mercer and Matt Colville, who put out these videos and these amazing things, because you see things different. You see that they can work, and and it helps all of us, and it works out really well. I hope that someday I can be that inspiration for someone, with these types of shows, talking about this, finding new ways of saying things. And even if we're saying the same things that other people say, even if we're doing videos on the same topics, we say it in a different way, and it means it's going to connect with people who those other ones didn't connect with. So Ben, I want to thank you very much for being here and being my co-host today. That was amazing. Last night, I just was like, I need help. Please help me. You stepped right up, and I really appreciate that. You can find Ben on YouTube. Somebody, one of our many, many mods will post the link again, I hope. Also, please go check out our network, nerdsmith.org. Find a bunch of amazing entertainment on there, including this show, and we're very proud to be part of that. And at 7 o'clock PST tonight, we'll have Countless Heroes on for their 82nd episode, I believe. So that's that. So again, thank you, Ben, so much. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Watch this on our YouTube later. And, of course, go check out Ben's YouTube and make sure you like, subscribe, and follow. Is that what we do? Is that how we do this on YouTube? I don't
Yeah, I guess it's something about a bell.
Like, subscribe, and follow. Right?
Subscribe, follow, whatever.
Oh, we're supposed to start with that. Damn. You're supposed to start with the like, subscribe, and follow. That way everyone gets it right off the bat. Alrighty, guys. Thank you very much. We will see you for this show next week. You can also find Ben on nerdsmith.org at Dear DM. He was on the last episode of Dear DM. So please go check that out as well. So anyway, go check out Ben's page, like, subscribe, follow, do all that great stuff. And we will talk to you next week. All right, bye guys. And thank you, Ben.